It'd be weird if you needed to defeat a boss in order to turn the page of a book. Or if before you moved on to the next track of an album, you needed to master a tricky rhythm section. Games are the only art form where parts of the experience, including narrative progress, can be gated, usually behind challenges. Are these gates just a fundamental part of games, the way words are a fundamental part of books and sound a part of music? How has this tradition influenced the development of the form in both digital and analog spaces? And what happens if we leave it behind? Is it still a game? Let's start by asking, why are games hard? And one answer is the same reason everything is hard: capitalism. The first video games to really connect with a mass audience were arcade games. And every time you play, you put in a quarter. The more often you lose, the quicker the game ends, the more quarters you feed into it. In 1978, Space Invaders made over $600 million, about $3 billion in today's money, and that was just in Japan. That was before it came over to the US. The arcade games of this period are theoretically endless. When you clear a screen you haven't won, you just move on to another, harder screen. I say theoretically, of course, because of hardware limitations. After a couple hundred levels, most games become literally unplayable. But no one expected you to get that far, and if you did, it was after a lot of practice. A lot of quarters. These games could be artistic, but they weren't designed to be artistic. They were designed to do the same thing as slot machines and pachinko, to last a few minutes, so as to maximize income per hour. It's the same reason most movies are 2 hours or less, not 3 or more. The shorter the movie is, the more showings you can squeeze out in a night. Now, before you actually me, yes, longer, effects-driven spectacles tend to make more money these days, but they're also playing on more screens per night. Now, people apparently get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. I don't, obviously, but normal people do. And as arcade games got more sophisticated, they started using narrative to incentivize continued play. Beat so many screens and you get a little bit of story. Now you want to see what happens next. Or what if there was more than one level? It's like I'm playing 2 arcade games for the price of 1. This led to arcade games to have an actual narrative progression, a beginning, a middle, and end. Now, a lot of these still looped around. If you defeated Mr. Sandman in Punch-Out, like, you won, but the game immediately brought Class Joe back. But what happens if we add narrative, suspense, and mystery? Well, human beings are generally pretty curious, and they like stories, so they're gonna get invested and want to know what happens next. It doesn't even need to be a good story. For example, let's look at a game that's pretty unremarkable and pretty much half-asses its story: Fatal Fury 3. Now, the first Fatal Fury ended with Geese Howard, the bad guy, getting kicked off a building and dying, but in Fatal Fury 3, oh no, he's alive again. How did he survive? It's got something to do with magic scrolls. I'm not sure what that means, but I want to find out. Oh, did you see that? I got kicked into the water. I wonder what happens in the next stage. I beat Geese. He's not even the boss. This guy is, and oh cool, in round 2 there's a train? That's neat. Wait, he's not the boss either? Again, it's not a good story, but it has a story shape, and a story's aesthetic pleasures, new characters, new locales, the cool little details that you'll tell your friends about. Whereas I look at this screen and I am seeing everything it has to offer. That story shape makes a huge difference. It's a huge step in the maturation of the form, and one that carries over into console and computer gaming. And, you know, a game like Super Mario Bros. Doesn't have much of a story in a narrative sense, but it does have this story shape. Like, do you remember the first time you saw 3-1? It's just suddenly this guy throwing hammers at you? I was 6 years old, and it freaked me the hell out. And it also delighted me. It's a new thing. It's neat. Throughout most of the game, there's new things or new combinations of things all the time, new delights. But when I was a kid, I didn't get to see all of them. Like, it wasn't until I was in my late 20s I finally got past this stupid jump in 8-1. But when I was 6, I was just not capable of doing it. And it should be hard, right? Games get harder as they reach the end. How else are they going to eat your quarters? Except this isn't an arcade game. There's no quarters for it to eat. So why are games still like this? There's a lot of vestigial bits that we get from arcade games that used to be everywhere, and we've kind of abandoned them except for nostalgic throwbacks. Like, most action games at a certain point in time gave you 3 lives, and once you ran out of your 3 lives, you got a game over. Apparently Space Invaders was the first game to do this, though it's pretty similar to the way pinball gives you 3 balls to a quarter, and like pinball, you can earn an extra life by hitting so many points. So action games started you off with 3 lives because that's just what you do in games, and games had scores because that's just how games are. Which gives us something like the first Mega Man, which is kind of notorious for having a pointless score system. Well, not pointless, you are literally scoring points, but you know what I mean. There's no one-up for hitting 10,000 points or whatever. The game is balanced instead around the hero's life bar, health pickups, and the occasional one-up. And they must have realized it, because going forward, the series abandons the scoring system, and even losing all your lives doesn't mean you have to start over. Like most NES games, these ones didn't come equipped with the batteries that allowed you to save your progress, but it did allow you to continue, or to use a password. So, in this structure, what is an extra life worth? You lose a life, you go back to the most recent checkpoint. You lose all of them, you have to replay the level from the start, but it's not the case where a game over means you have to start all over again. Essentially, you have unlimited lives, so why track them? Like the score in the first Mega Man, is just a leftover bit of design inherited from the days of the arcade. And I think people kind of knew this all along. Games that did allow for save files didn't have lives, usually, and when they did, it felt weird. Last year, I played the game Doom for the first time, and I fell madly in love with it. Hot take, Doom is good. You start out with just a pistol, but as you progress through the levels, you pick up other kinds of weapons, ammo, etc. And in Doom, you can save your game at any time. Now, if you die, you're given the option to continue, and if you do, you'll start whatever level you were on over again with just a pistol. But why would you ever do that if you could just reload your save? Get in the habit of saving at the start of every level and you'll be fine. At a certain point, developers realized we were all doing this, and autosaves were born. Most games that come out today are built around save states and frequent checkpoints, around unlimited lives basically, and therefore around the expectation that whatever challenge the game gives you, eventually you will overcome it and get to the other side and see the next new thing. In the AAA space, that new thing is almost always narrative. Like, I never hear people raving about doing cool flashlight moves in Alan Wake. It's always about the story and the characters and the world building. And I'm not coming at this from the point of view of, does this even need to be a game then? The fact that it's a game, that we're experiencing it in an interactive way, does contribute meaning. People crap on games like Gone Home for being games where you just walk around and look at things, but the very act of you walking around and looking changes the nature of the experience and the way in which we gather and process information, both intellectually and emotionally.
Lonnie brought her hair dye over today. She said, "I need to fix these roots. Think you could help?" Dyeing hair is weirdly intimate. I don't know if I've touched someone else's scalp before. It's pretty intimate, right? It felt intimate. We looked into the mirror together after, and I expected her to say something about how it looked crappy or good or whatever. But that's when she said, "You're so beautiful." And she was looking at me. Right in that moment, I wanted to say something, but I waited, and the moment was gone.
The film director Peter Watkins describes mass audiovisual media as having a hierarchical relationship with its audience, enforced by the standardized language of film itself, the tradition of seamless continuity editing that directs, holds, and manipulates the audience's attention. And to push back against that, Watkins tried to make films that were non-hierarchical, in which the audience was an active participant, choosing where to look and what to take in. Now, frankly, I don't know if he ever quite got there, because the audience can't point the camera where they want or choose what happens once it's there. At least, you can't do that in a film. Years ago, I actually wrote Watkins an email and said, "Have you thought about making video games? These are like a really natural fit for your whole deal." And he wrote me back and said, I am not going to do that. I am 70 years old. Which, fair. So I don't have a problem with a game where the story is the focus, even when that story is fairly linear. Again, my question isn't, does this story really need to be told through a game? But rather, does this story told through this game need to be placed behind difficulty gates? It's pretty common for video games to have different difficulty settings, with some games offering a story mode where resources are plentiful and challenges quite trivial. And this is something unique to this medium. Partially, difficulty toggles exist to address issues that are likewise unique to gaming. Not everyone has the physical reflexes needed to play a game well, nor the free time or capacity to develop them. When a film is difficult or challenging, we might not get it, but we can still experience it. But because the experience of a game is doled out in gated segments, those gates are going to keep some people out. And if you're an artist, you're creating something, you want people to engage with it. And if you're a company and you spent $70 million on a game, you want as many people as possible to buy it. Now, of course, I'm drawing a distinction here between games where the difficulty is the point, where it is the experience. Like, an easy mode for getting over it would defeat the whole purpose and be a fundamentally different experience. But aren't they all in a way fundamentally different? Like, the easy mode of Doom has fewer enemies with slower response times. The contents of this room are now different. The level design is different. I mean, it's the same space, the same corridors, but what's in that space can be very different. When I play on easy mode, am I actually playing Doom, a carefully calibrated experience known for its clever level design, or am I playing some kind of bowdlerization? If you watch a film that's been re-edited for network TV, have you actually seen the film?
Where'd you get that beauty scar, tough guy? Eating pineapple?
But maybe this is just a hierarchical way of looking at art, a way that doesn't really apply to an art form where the audience is also the co-author. Maybe the only art form where the audience is actually necessary. If a projector starts running a 100-minute film, 50 minutes later is halfway through, even if there's no one watching it. But a game won't move forward if you don't do anything. It can't play itself. Some story-based games really lean to this idea of co-authorship, giving you a lot of control over how its story plays out, and that being the focus of the experience. Last year, Salwin and I played Pentiment, a murder mystery RPG set in Bavaria during the Reformation. It begins with the murder of a baron, and protagonist Andreas Maurer must sort through the suspects and their motives, and then name the perpetrator, who is executed. And spoiler warning, the killer is this dickbag, Brother Ferenc. Well, at least that's who we accused. I think we got it right. I hope. The game doesn't tell you. There is no right answer. There are only consequences. When you return to the town years later, just in time for another murder, the place and the people have changed. Some of that is mounting political unrest. This is right around the time of the Peasants' War. But some of that has to do with who you accused. And now they're asking you to do it all over again. But this time around, you have less time and fewer pieces to fit together. At least we found fewer pieces, which means when it came time to make our accusation, we weren't really sure that we got it right, and it made us wonder if we got it right the first time around. I was really sick to my stomach. The game's third act is much more linear. The game only has one ending, which your choices will not alter, and it's a good ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's easily one of the best endings I've seen in a video game. And if you play the game, you will see it, because there is no way to lose the game or have it reload. There are no content gates here. Or are there? Throughout the game, there are a number of persuasion checks. You try to convince someone to do something or share some piece of information, and the success or failure can have life or death consequences for other characters. Actions you've taken previously will influence the check positively or negatively. And the thing about these checks is, I don't know they're going to happen until they already have. The game just announces the results and tells me which choices led to the check passing or failing.
Anytime an opportunity to insult Guy comes up, Andreas just cannot help himself.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
You are so insincere, and you're so obvious about it, Guy. I think we can just go for this one.
Yeah.
Why are you always such an asshole? Brother Guy, I'd like to think we've been on reasonably good terms until now. Does that count for nothing? Okay, he didn't like... I did not convince Guy to explain himself. That's fair. I have never been very, very decent to Guy. We do not convince Casper to leave Tassing.
Oh no.
Please, Casper. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you. The problem is, we've been too... we've made him too fucking loyal. There was that time when we yelled at him in the cistern. Everybody loses their temper some of the time, but yeah, we've been too kind and loyal, and he's gonna stick with us.
As a result of these choices, there are certain parts of the story, certain parts of the experience that are just closed to me. I will never get to see them, at least not in this playthrough. There's a lot I won't get to see. Remember how I said you didn't have much time to solve the murders? You're given a number of avenues to pursue, but each of these take up time. If I attend the autopsy, I might not have time to interrogate one of my suspects. These choices determine what clues I'm able to find and what story I'm able to present. And maybe, because I never got around to talking to Lucky the Stonemason and figure out his whole deal, maybe that guy just got away with murder, and an innocent man is going to be executed. This incompleteness and the doubts it produces in the player is completely consistent with the game's themes about how history can be hidden, transformed, ridden over, and rendered ultimately unknowable. So this isn't a difficulty gate where it stops you from moving forward until you overcome a specific challenge. It's an agency gate where it forks. Some parts of the experience become closed to me, but another one is open and the game continues to move forward. And I'm not saying one thing is better than the other. These work for Pentiment because they're thoughtfully implemented and thematically relevant. And you can do the same with gates where passing or failing depends on player skill, or even the roll of a die. Let's look, for example, at Disco Elysium, which also gates parts of the experience behind skill checks. Like in a tabletop RPG, these are based on die rolls modified by your relevant stats. Before you roll, the game tells you how difficult the check is, how likely you are to succeed, and how your past choices will impact the outcome. Disco has white checks, which can be retried, and red checks, which cannot. If I fail a red check, that path is just closed to me. Fail a white check, and I can reopen it by earning a new modifier or gaining enough experience points to level up the relevant stat. I'm in the middle of a Disco playthrough on Samhain's channel. It's my first time playing the game, and she's very adamant about me avoiding spoilers, which is not usually how I engage with media. I read spoilers all the time before I do anything. But I'm trying to be good and not see spoilers, so please don't actually talk about the story of the game in my comments. I kind of hit an impasse during the game's second day. In order to progress the plot, I needed to prove my authority to Titus Hardy, and I failed the check. Now this is a white check, so I can reopen it, and I do, and then I immediately fail it again. And then I'm just kind of stuck for a while, trying to get the check to reopen, which I do the following morning. At this point, I've been trying to pass this one check, which again, is necessary for the plot to progress, for 7.5 hours. I'm not talking about the game's clock. I'm talking about actual time in my life. And I still fail. But then Kim steps in and solves the problem for me, gets the information we need, which unlocks the door that was literally preventing us from moving forward for the last 7.5 hours. Why is this a skill check? If it's the only way forward, why can I fail it? And if that failure ultimately doesn't matter, if you can have someone step in and do it for me, why make me roll for it at all? Because the game, at least in part, is about failure. Not just the consequences of it, but the feeling of it, the living with it. You start the game having already failed. You haven't done your job, you've lost your gun, lost your badge, lost your shoe, you've alienated everyone around you with violent and erratic behavior. This guy is a loser, paralyzed by self-loathing and self-pity. When you fail your Titus Hardy check, the game makes you choose the method of your failure, the way in which your character thinks he's going to succeed, but you, the player, you know that he won't. The first time I failed, I yelled and stomped my feet like a child. It was so humiliating that I took damage from it. The second time I failed, I borrowed my partner's gun, put it in my mouth, and threatened to shoot myself if people didn't start respecting me.
No, that is not what is happening. This show is unnecessary. Give me my gun now.
Don't. There's this itch in the middle of your skull where you've never reached, never scratched.
Unsurprisingly, they respected me less.
My partner likes to play these jokes. Here's what you call dark.
Dark? What the fuck was that, you carnies? We haven't seen RCM in 4 years, and this shows up?
I knew he wasn't gonna do it, though. I knew he'd pussy out.
No. I still have my money on him. Sooner or later, he has that look.
The third time I failed, I was finally given the option of asking for help. And then I stood there, useless, while Kim quickly, effortlessly got the job done. Kim, who had been watching me the entire time, who watched me stomp my feet, who had to talk me out of shooting myself, who was hoping each time I wouldn't let him down, and every time I did. Because of course I did. Because that's all I seem capable of doing. This difficulty gate creates meaning, not just on a structural level. It has emotional and thematic resonance. And it's not the only game to do this with a difficulty gate. Not to be the trans girl who is always bringing up Celeste, but the game's difficulty gates are a huge part of how it tells this story about trying and failing and trying again, an external representation of the protagonist's struggle for self-acceptance and self-worth. And here, the game uses frequent checkpoints, discrete challenges, and quick load times to keep you trying, to emphasize that all this is accomplished one screen, one tiny step at a time. When difficulty and agency gates are used well, it can be very resonant. But when they're being used just because that's how games are, it's frustrating and perfunctory. It's a little like straight people in movies. Bear with me. I've watched a lot of older movies, a lot of old Hollywood stuff, and the thing you notice pretty quick is that almost every movie has a heterosexual love story. And sometimes these are good. They contribute to the theme and characterization. They can be legitimately sexy, which is not a thing I'd usually say about a shot with a dude in it, but like, go you, Jimmy Stewart. And sometimes they're just like, there. This is particularly common in thrillers and film noir. Like, every time I see Shadow of a Doubt, I forget that at some point during the 5 minutes they're on screen together, the heroine falls in love with the FBI agent tracking down her uncle. And I forget that they fall in love because, no, they didn't. The film is wrong. The film is just wrong about this. Or Ministry of Fear. This guy is on the run from the Nazis because he guessed the weight of a cake and it turned out it contained a microfilm. Guessing game used as a front for crime or espionage used to be an oddly common trope. There's a whole episode of the 50s Superman show where he uses his super jelly bean counting vision to help a little old lady win such a contest, but actually is a racketeering scam. Sometime between briefly meeting Marjorie and Reynolds and their next scene together, the two of them have fallen madly in love with each other, and like, no one believes this, no one cares, no one is shipping this. We just want to see the spy stuff. But it's a movie, and a movie has to have a romance. It's just what you do in every movie. Look, I'm pretty tolerant. I don't have a problem with straight cis people kissing on the screen so long as it's actually justified by the plot and not just shoehorned in. Disco and Pentiment are described as RPGs, but they're closer, especially Pentiment, to a visual novel. This is a form of game that's very writing forward, very dialogue heavy, focused on character and mood. Interactivity is usually limited to what dialogue option you select or who you choose to spend time with. The first one I ever played was We Know the Devil, which, if you haven't played it, you should. It's really good, and I'm gonna spoil the hell out of it if that matters to you. The game centers around 3 characters who all kinda hate themselves. Jupiter is really struggling with her queerness. Neptune bullies those around her. And then there's Venus, who is trans but doesn't know it yet. These 3 are locked in a cabin in the woods at a Christian summer camp where they have to trap and fight the devil. And over the course of the night, the characters will split off and regroup. You'll have to choose which 2 characters stay together. Then you get a scene with the 2 of them and you watch it play out. And at the end of the game, whoever you spent the least amount of time with, they transform into the devil against their will. Each character's body horror ending plays out as a tragedy, the natural result of a world that teaches us to hate ourselves, teaches us that how we are is monstrous and wrong. teaches us to push away others when we recognize those parts of ourselves in them. But there's a fourth ending which you get when you spend an equal amount of time with all three characters. All three choose to become monsters together, and these body horror transformations become something different, something beautiful and defiant and empowering and joyful.
Neptune is starting to run clear. All the ink and sick has boiled away. Venus is really good at helping, and so patient too. She is a fountain seeping through the floorboards, bringing the flood. Jupiter finds the spot where Venus's shoulder blade is weeping and pulls with as many hands as she can. When it comes out, it stares at them, surprised, as if she can hardly believe she can see. She has a hand for every kind of touch. That hand is for hitting, that hand is for petting, that hand is for grabbing, that hand is for holding. The devil isn't lonely. The cracking, broken radio's song is louder and more lovely every minute.
And the thing about this ending is that the first time you play the game, you can't get it. The option that lets you have equal time with all three isn't available until you've seen the other endings. It's a game about characters taking and reclaiming agency, in which your own agency as a player is fairly limited. The agency gates here aren't intended to create a unique narrative with you as a co-author, seeing some parts of the game and missing others. The intention is that you will see everything, because only then will that ending have meaning. Which sort of makes this a piece of interactive hierarchical art. Some people slag on visual novels as a whole, and say they're not really games. But, I don't know, a lot of those linear story-focused AAA games, which people think are games, they're interactive and hierarchical. I don't actually have a tremendous amount of experience with visual novels myself, but I am interested in them, especially in regards to questions of agency and interactivity. One of my oldest friends actually has written a lot of visual novels, though on the more commercial, less experimental side. He's also the first video essayist I ever watched. Before I even knew what a video essay was, I was watching his LGBT media analysis series, Needs More Gay. Jamie, in a way, all of this is your fault. Over the years, he's playtested my board games, written for my magazine, and moved my furniture. In this long-standing tradition of continuing to request his free labor for my personal gain, I asked him to answer some questions about his work.
I've always really enjoyed writing fiction. Never really had an opportunity to, do it for money until I kind of just came across a job posting for a job basically editing published romance novels into a sort of interactive kind of choose your own adventure kind of format made for mobile platforms. That's kind of where I first got started. Which as a gay man, when I always tell people, I think it's very funny that one of my first, my entry point in this was writing heterosexual erotica, or rather adapting heterosexual erotica, which I think is very funny. I mean, a lot of romance games marketed to young women are actually male some of there's kind of a market for that. So that is something I have done. Some of these are, by female writers. So I have adapted male romances written by women into this interactive format.
So when you're doing those adaptations, so how interactive are they getting in the adaptation? Like, how much branching is there?
So with a lot of these mobile apps, I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of them are just kind of, it's not very complex. For some of them, it's just basically just, you're telling a story, and every once in a while you'll get a couple choices to choose from. The way that a lot of these apps are monetized is basically you'll have a premium choice that costs gems to spend on, and those are usually choices that are more desirable. Mm-hmm. Almost all these are in the romance genre, so typically you'll have something like, I want to flirt with the guy, or I want to not flirt with the guy, and flirting with the guy will cost some gems. So a lot of them, if you're just looking to make a quick buck, a lot of these will have just very simple, not very complex. I mean, you'll have a little bit of branching, but typically they'll always go back to they'll kind of branch off for a couple different paths, and then they'll kind of everything will converge back to the main storyline. And that's honestly not a bad way to. I mean, even just a lot of visual novels in general will be structured that way, because otherwise you're writing a lot of stuff that the reader might not ever see. So it's kind of a way to make it more efficient. But you'll have some. I'm actually working on a project right now that I don't think I can talk too much about, but it's an all text project, and it'll be a little bit more complex. You'll have a few more branches, and it's kind of more based more around like stat building. You know, it's going to be a little more complex than what I have done in the past. Every through some, like, you basically want to have an interval where you have a choice every now and then, just kind of keep the player engaged, because otherwise it's basically just reading a book.
These kind of romance adaptions that are, you know, are on the simpler, more straightforward side. So these are basically designed with like because like a romance novel is different than like a dating sim. Like a dating sim, you have all these potential choices, potential romances, and a novel really is always about this couple, right? So, so is there ever really a bad ending?
Sometimes I've written for apps where basically there's one love interest that you're kind of romancing the whole time. The way that some of these will work is that, you know, you'll depending on how many premium choices you buy, that will determine whether or not you get the good ending or the bad ending. And usually the bad ending is not, you know, super bad. It's just kind of like, let's just stay friends, or, you know, it's kind of bittersweet. Like maybe like we're gonna split up for now, but maybe we'll get back together someday. Just so it's not like a completely like, oh, what did I spend all that time playing this game for? If that's how it's gonna end. So I mean, yeah, typically that's how some games will work. There are others where, well, the game I'm working on right now, so there's two love interests that you can basically choose either one, and there's pretty much always going to be it's going to be a good ending. It might just be a different ending, but you're ultimately going to end up with the person that you wanted to romance. So it really kind of varies from game to game. I would say like the ones that are kind of just more based on you know, getting your money and you know, getting premium choices are going to be there might be a bad ending that's possible to get depending on how much money you spend.
Well, that was grim. I spend a lot of my time thinking about what it means to be an artist working in a capitalist society. I want to make these things because I want to make them. I have things I want to express and explore. But I also have to sell these things for money, and how much money I make determines how alive I get to be. And, you know, I'm never going to be the most commercial board game designer, but I do need to sell enough of these things that I can eat and have shelter. So in that way, capitalism absolutely informs the kinds of art that I make and how I make it. And people talk about this part a lot, I think, about trying to appeal to an audience and the trade-offs that are involved, being creative under capitalism. But capitalism also dictates the structural features of the art, and I don't feel like we talk about that nearly enough. For most of its history, television has divided an hour into segments, separated by advertisements. It's hard to tell a story when you keep being interrupted, so you serialize it within each episode. You have to fit certain plot beats within certain segments, giving each episode a standardized, expected structure. To maintain attention within this stop-start rhythm, you need to excite and agitate the audience. Short scenes, quick cuts, no downtime. This has accelerated over time. Across film and TV, the average length of shots has decreased. In 1930, it was about 12 seconds, and in 2009, it was about 2. Now, I'm not saying this is bad. The reason for it, capitalism, is bad, and the ubiquity of it is bad because it is narrowing what's acceptable in mainstream art. But, you know, I wouldn't want a version of Mad Max Fury Road where the shots are 12 seconds long. And, you know, it's interesting that films took on these rhythms that were made for television without having ad breaks themselves. Yet. Give them time. In the same way that it's interesting that console and PC games took on the difficulty gates of arcade games, or the way that board games did. Oh, you thought I forgot this is a channel about board games? I didn't. The only place you really see narrative gating in board games are legacy games, where you get these little boxes and envelopes that you can open up between sessions, and you earn the ability to do so by completing a scenario, or completing a goal within a scenario, or even across a number of scenarios. This gives you two incentives. One, to win the session, and two, to accomplish the goal. And these two things together might alter how you approach a given play session. You see a similar meta structure in roguelite games. Generally speaking, roguelites are structured around a series of runs through procedurally generated levels and bosses. A single run of a roguelite is kind of like a playthrough of another game, but usually shorter. During the run, whether you win or lose, you are working towards unlocking new abilities and challenges that will feature in future runs. In the Hades games, this largely revolves around earning certain currencies or items that carry over from run to run, and can be exchanged between runs to upgrade or alter your weapons and the series of passive abilities you'll take into each new run. In Balatro, about a third of the game's jokers are unlocked based on things you've accomplished over the course of the game. Like once you play 200 hands, you get the Acrobat, which gives you a ×3 to your last hand of the round. Once you've lost 5 games, you unlock Mr. Bones. When you're about to lose, he'll self-destruct to save you. Both of these games have difficulty gates, parts of the experience you unlock only by winning a run, like Hades' developing story or the new decks in Balatro. But outside this exists a secondary series of optional difficulty gates, some of which aren't hard at all. Like, I can lose 5 games of Balatro, that's really easy in fact, I'm really good at that part. Sometimes in these games, I'm doing a run not with the intention of winning, but specifically just to complete a given meta goal so I can unlock something. Like, yeah, if I block all these spawn points, I'm going to lose the game, but I do get that shiny medal I need to unlock a new squad. One thing the secondary difficulty gates in roguelites accomplishes is that it makes win or lose less central, and that's something I've always been interested in. In my own legacy board game, Kaiju Table Battles, new monsters and narrative pieces are gated behind cooperative meta goals in a competitive game. So while you want to win the match, you also want to open that envelope. I'm trying to encourage you to approach these life and death battles in a more playful way, making these monster fights something joyous and a little goofy, like they are in the Showa-era films this game is a love letter to. It also relates to the game's themes of queer community, trans identity, and self-growth. You know, I've been harping on capitalism a lot in this video, and that's because it sucks. It is killing our planet, and maybe we should do something about that. But in order to take action, we first need to recognize the way in which it has bent every aspect of our lives to serve its purposes. The way it dictates our norms, structures, and expectations in everything, including in our art. Now, before you go all guy in a well, yet you participate, curious on me, again, there is a lot of good, interesting personal art done within those structures and in opposition to it. Like all the games we talked about today. And basically, every game or film I've discussed today is a work of art that I deeply admire. But part of me has to wonder what games would look like, what shapes they would take, if they never had to eat our quarters in the first place. If you like these videos, you can support me at patreon.com/Amabel Holland. $5 will get you producer credit, and $10 will give you double producer credit, where you're listed in the credits twice in a row. Both tiers also got to vote on what video I'm going to be doing next. I gave them 4 options. And you know, after talking about Peter Watkins in this video and in my book, I'm kind of hoping they voted for Edvard Munch, so let's see what they picked. Oh, well, it's a 3-way tie, and there are 0 votes for Edvard Munch. Okay, well, I'm going to do all 3 of these eventually. Mechagodzilla is going to be another long one, so I'm going to hold off on that because I just did a long one. I'll probably do games as toys first, just so I have a little time to relax before jumping right into production again.
Oh.